assuming that you have Node.js set up and you have Yarn installed and you've got a text editor going on, let's get into actually building the React application. Before we get into doing this, I just want to quickly talk about Create React App, which is what we're going to use to configure our build. So a lot of things go in the background in creating a React application, and a lot of the times, if you really want to get really specific about how things work, you'll have to specify these things on your own. But that's kind of like too much for a beginner. So we're gonna have something called a Create React App, which is you can find it in Facebook's GitHub repo. This is a build. This is basically a command line interface where you can generate a React, like a base for a React application, so that you don't have to specify any configuration before actually starting to write code in the application. So as you can see, it says create React apps with no build configuration. So that's what this is, and it's got some instructions on how to do it. It's very simple. But first, let's get into. I'm going to move into my desktop where I'll create the React application. So let's say npx create React app, and I'm going to call my app. This is the name of the app, so I'm going to call this React demo app, and it's going to do a bunch of things. It'll create a directory with the name of the application that we're specifying. It should already have created a directory. Oh, it's gonna do that now. Yeah, so it's gonna create this directory, and then it'll start installing the dependencies for the basic React application. So it's looking for packages and linking that stuff. It's gonna take a couple of minutes, it says here. So it's gotten all the packages and it's starting to link all of them, and it's done. Okay, so it's basically installed all of these dependencies which a React application will depend on. We don't need to worry about any of these. It's going on in the background, and it says it's created React demo app at this directory, and we can run these commands now using Yarn. So it says Yarn starts the development server. Let's actually go into our application and then do Yarn start, see what it gives. So immediately it opens the browser. It opens localhost 3000 in the browser, and this is the layout we get out of the box. It says welcome to React. To get started, edit src app.js and save to reload. Okay, so that's nice. Let's open this up in our text editor. I'm using VS Code, so I type code dot. If you're using Atom, you'd say atom space dot, or if it's Sublime, it's a subl space dot, and you should be able to open this directory. Now this is the our application directory, and as you can see, it's got a bunch of stuff here. So it's got a package.json. If you're new to JavaScript based applications or anything that uses Node, this is something that you'll find new. It's basically a place where it says the name of the application and a bunch of different things, and then it specifies the dependencies. This is what we're interested in. So right now our application is depending on React, React DOM, and React scripts. These are different React packages, and then different scripts. Let's say if you run npm start or yarn start, it calls this React scripts space start. That's the command you're specifying for the start script. And if you say yarn build, it's going to say React scripts build, which will build the application for production, things like that. And and this is git ignore for, if you're setting up a git repository, and then this is a file automatically generated when you run yarn install, if you install the dependencies, readme file. And this is the meat of our application. This is where our source code for the application lies. We'll get to that. This is a folder with a bunch of dependencies. All the dependencies that are installed are inside this folder now. And the public is just things that, like the favicon and the public index.html and things like that. We don't need to worry about any of these things other than src, the source code for their application. In this, we have a bunch of different files. The index.js is the entry point for the application. So in here, we're basically rendering this component, app component, to the root of the document. Okay, and we importing this app from app.js. If you notice here, it says /app. Basically means within the current directory of this file, it's got a file named app, and by convention, if you're using Node, you don't need to specify the .js. Okay, so you don't need to specify .js here. So it'll basically import this from this file. And if you go look at this file, we have a bunch of imports here, and then we're defining the component here. We're saying class app extends component. So this is the name of the component, and we're extending the component that we're importing here from React. And then we have a render method, and then a return with a certain HTML-like syntax. We'll look at that further. And then we are exporting that app as a default, which is why we're able to import it here. If we didn't have this one line, we wouldn't be able to import app into this file. So that's really important. So let's look at what this is. If you look at this, what's appearing on our browser, it's over here we have something called a header, and then image with a logo. This is the logo, this is the header, the black thing is the header, and then a h1 with the title saying welcome to React. So we have the header closing tag for header here, and then a paragraph tag open. It says to get started, edit this. So this is where we are defining what appears on this page, on the root of the page, root of the application. Now let's go ahead and delete all this. Then we'll say or we'll just say hello world. And as you can see, the browser has updated the changes, and we really didn't have to do anything like refresh the page or restart the server. This thing happens automatically whenever you save changes to a file. What happens is, in the command line, in the terminal, the server will automatically update the changes, compile the changes, and then it will update it to the DOM. Now, if you look at what it's saying here, it's saying compile with warnings. This is it's saying that in app.js file on line 2, your logo is defined, but it's never used, and this is rendered like offered as a warning to us. This is something that happens in every React application. When you compile and there's something that's it's not acceptable as a convention, then it'll show us a warning. Now this is good. Now we don't have a unused import or unused variable or anything like that. So it's a good practice to have clean code, and the compiler automatically tells us what to do if there are any warnings and stuff. So this is great. Now for our demo, I'm just going to build a very basic static website with which has a few pages: a home page, an about page, and then a contact page where you'd enter your details, and then it'll send it to an API service, which we'll look into further. But because we're going to have multiple pages, it's important to have a nav bar. So we'll build that. Now, if you look at what I'm doing here, this piece of code looks like it's HTML, but it's not HTML, because if you look at this, it's a JS file. It's a JavaScript file, and if you know anything about HTML and all that stuff, you should know that HTML is written in .html files. And as a matter of fact, this is not HTML. This is something called JSX. JSX is it also comes from the guys that who did React, if I'm not mistaken. And JSX is writing HTML-like syntax within a JavaScript file, and then it gets compiled into actual HTML, or the React equivalent of what that would mean in HTML. So this is a convenient way of writing the rendering elements, and I'm just gonna do the menu real quick. So because we're gonna have 3 different pages, one is the home page, another one is the about page, and then the contact page, I created an unordered list with these as the links. Let's look at how this looks now. And it looks pretty bad. This is not how we want our menu to look. So we'll do a bunch of CSS changes to this. Now, if you look at what we have here, we are importing a CSS file. It's this file here. So over here we have defined the classes, and we are able to use it over here. And if you work with HTML, you know that we can define class names as class equals and then the name of that class. But here, if you see, it's in JSX, we are calling it as class name instead of class. So this is a convention in JSX where because a class is a reserved word, we have to use class name. This is one of the few differences between JSX and regular HTML. So we have we need to make some CSS changes. So we'll just say class name. We're going to define a class called menu, and then in the menu we'll say list style type is none. So what this will do is it'll remove these bullet points, which we really don't need. So I saved that, and it automatically updated without those things. Now this is one way to import CSS definitions. Another way is through the style prop. So what the style prop is, in any of the tags that you want to add some CSS styles, you basically write this in as part of the tag, opening tag. So style equals double open 2 curly braces, and then in here you'll specify the CSS. So if you look at this is not how we would define CSS in a CSS file. If you look at here, we don't use double quotes here and things like that, and then we can use hyphens. But within the inline CSS styling, we have to specify it using double quotes. And let's say we have something like margin left or something like that. Normally we would do something like this, but in the inline styling we cannot do that. We cannot have hyphens, so we do something like this: camel case, margin left equals left, or something like that, 10 pixels. So this is how we would write within the inline styling. Just to keep I'm just letting you know, for you to keep in mind in case you're doing that. But other than that, the syntax is pretty much similar to how you do in a normal CSS. So let's just copy paste this. We need this inline display for all of these lists, so that our list elements appear on a horizontal single line. So if I save this, it's gonna line up in a single line, which is good for a nav bar we want. And I'm gonna put some spaces here so that it's got some spaces on there. Great. Now we have the placeholders for links to different pages. but before we can click on them and then let it take us to a different page, we need to import something called a React router. So the core package for React does not include the router. You have to import it as a third-party package. It's an external dependency, basically, is what I'm saying. So in here we're going to import browser router and then route from React router DOM. And we're going to wrap the entire app component within the browser router. And here we're going to put the app component within a route component, route tag, and then put the app inside a component prop. Don't worry too much about the syntax. This is just you can get this from the documentation. So if I save this now, it's going to say React router DOM not found, which basically means that we have to install this separately before it can recognize that. So let's quickly do that. We'll say yarn add React router DOM -- save. Now this is how you install dependencies. Yarn add the name of the package that you want to add to the application, and then the -- save will just add this as a listing in the list of dependencies in our package.json. This is one way of doing it. You can also add it over here and then do yarn install, and then it will install the dependencies, but we're just going to go do it this way. And if you actually look at this, once it's done installing, you'll be able to see React router DOM appear here. It'll automatically add that in here. So we have that. And our compiler has detected changes and automatically compiled it for us, and now we have the error gone now. So as you can see, it's like pretty cool that it does most of the things on its own. You just have to do what you really have to do. And now that we have defined the setup we have to do in our index.js, we can go to our app.js, and then we can specify the routes here for the different pages in our application. For this, what we'll do is we'll import switch and then route from React router DOM. And then we'll create a switch tag, and then within the switch we will specify the routes for each of them. So we want home page in our root level route, and then we'll do it like this. Before we go any further, if you look at this, I'm calling the home component, but we don't really have the home component defined yet. So let's go and change that. Let's create the home component. And this is how you define a React component on regardless of what you're trying to do with the component. You'll basically import React first, and then component from React. If you look at what I'm doing here, I'm importing React without any curly braces, and over here I'm using curly braces. The difference is that this is a default export in the file where React is defined, and over here component is just a non-default export. So there's a multiple default exports. When you have multiple exports, you will specify them within curly braces. So we'll import that first, and then we'll say class home extends component, and within the component we'll say render. This is the render method, and sorry. So we have a render method, and within the render method we have a return statement that's going to return the actual output, what's rendered on the page. So here we'll just say h2, this is home, welcome home. We'll close the h2 tag, and we have to now export this home component. Because we have only one thing to export in this file, we'll just have that as a default export. Now that's done. Let's go and import home into this file, into app. Okay, and there we go. So because we've defined the path as the root path, so this is the home page, and so it says this is home, welcome home. Let's go change this a little bit. It's a little too close to the nav bar, so what we'll do is we'll just say, okay, so what I just did here is a line break. And if you know how things work in regular HTML, you don't have a self-closing tag for this. This is something else that's also different with JSX. Here you have to close every tag. This is called a self-closing tag. So you have to close this tag. You can't just have BR like this. You have to have it closed. Okay, so that's working. Now let's go create other routes here. The about, we'll just copy paste that, and we have contact, and before we save this file, let's go create those two components. And I'm just gonna copy from home, and then for these ones. And over here we'll say about us, and we'll put a this is the about page. Now let's do the same with just copy and paste this file for the contact. And over here we'll say contact us. And now those two things are done. We'll just import them. And let's have a look at our website to see if these routes are imported and they're working. If we go to about, oh, okay, so this is something to know about the router. If you look here, we've set the root path to direct to home, and after that we specify the other ones. Now the way React Router works is you look for the first path, and it looks at what's matching, and over here it's a slash, and there's a forward slash, so it'll automatically select this as the one to render here. Now if you put this at the very bottom, now this will work because it goes by order. Now it'll look at this, and then it'll go one by one, and about matches, so it won't bother with the other two, checking with the other two. Now let's not do this. A better practice is to actually use the exact prop. So when you say exact, what happens is it'll check if the path is exactly what's specified in our path prop, what's specified over here. So if you say exact, then it's not going to match this with the with whatever is in here, and it'll look for the exact path here. And we don't need to specify exactly everywhere else. This is fine, and everything else should work. Now let's check if our contact route is working. Yeah, it's working. Great. Now we have the home page, about page, and the contact page, but our links don't point to them. Let's fix that. Let's import link module from the React router DOM, and over here we'll say link to equals the path, and then within the li tag should be as a child to the link tag. Let's save that, and if we click on home, it takes us to our home page, which is fantastic. Now let's do this for the other two links as well. Okay, so now we're done. We have these things. Let's give some additional space so that it's okay. Okay. One thing you need to know about JSX is so if you want extra spaces or something like that, you can just do this. It should work, but because we are specifying this within the li tag, this doesn't get recognized, which is fine. So we're now able to click on the links and go to the different pages, and you see the route getting updated on the URL. Great. Now let's focus on the contact page, because this is the more complicated part of our application, where we're going to get some inputs from the user, and then we're going to save it as data in our application. Now, first thing is let's say let's save that. So now we have an input field for the name. This is basically like a HTML input element, and we have one for the name. Now let's create one for email. And for the subject and message, okay, let's say that. And we have our form, and our form needs a submit button, so let's fix that. Okay, so we now have a submit button for the form, and if you look at the actual web page we have, we can type stuff into it, and if you click on submit, nothing really happens. Nothing happens at all. So let's change that. Let's grab the data that the user is entering and then do something with that data. For this, React components have something called state. It's called local state, where you can use what's happening within the component to to handle changes to the state. It's kind of abstract when I say it like that, but let me demonstrate what it is. So we define the state like this, and then over here we put some default values, like when the form loads, this is what the values of each of the things is going to be. Now we set the default values, and over here let's say the value is this dot state dot name. Now what this is going to do is in the input field, it will, no matter what you type into it, it will show the value to be this. Let's see how that works. Now if you see, I'm typing stuff into this, but nothing really happens. And let's say we set the default to hello, and it's going to show that as the default value for that form. So now if I type something into this, it's not going to show, it's not going to do anything. So the way things happen in React is you're able to render things programmatically as defined here. It's not like a regular HTML input field anymore. Now let's change that, and let's define a way to update the state and then have that value reflect in the input field as the user types something into it. For this, we use something called onChange. This is like you could think of it as like an event listener. So every time the value of this input field changes, this will get called, and we can pass in a function for this dot onNameChange, and we have to define the function here about the render method. So it's basically defined outside of the render method. So let me just write this function up, and then I'll explain what I'm trying to do here. On name change, over here we can do this set state. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm calling this function with something called e. We'll be basically grabbing the event from this input element, and then over here we're saying this dot set state, and we're assigning the value of that's being stored in the event to the name. Okay. Now if we save this file, we're gonna get an error. See what that error is. Actually, it's working, but let's start typing into this. It will show up. Okay. So it says cannot read property set state of undefined. Now if you look at how we're calling set state, we're saying this dot set state. Okay. And this basically means the component that this onChange is being called from. But when we're calling it just like this, it won't know what this is referring to. So what we have to do here is say dot bind this. Now we are passing in the component from which we're calling it, and so that it is able to get a reference to that particular place where it's being called from. Now if we save this, that error is going to go away, and we now have the value updating from the state. Now if you want to see what's in the state, there's a way to do this. So in our application, we're going to just console log a bunch of stuff so that we get an update on how the state is being updated. So I'm basically console logging this dot state, whatever is in this state variable, and it should print out what's in the state every time the component is being re-rendered. Let's see how that works. Now our component just loaded, and it's showing the default values as we would expect. Now let's go and change the values here. Now every time we type something, it's re-rendering the entire application, or rather it's re-rendering the view, and again we print out the stuff every time it re-renders. Let me walk you through how what is actually going on. Okay, so when we first load, it's showing this, and then the user enters this. So I entered A into this, and immediately an on change was triggered. It calls this function, which then uses the value that's passed in the event to set the name. Now the state is updated, and the way things work in React, every time the state changes, it will re-render the application or re-render the component. So when I typed A, it set the name to A, it re-rendered the application. Okay, and then that's when this line got printed. Okay, and now I type B again, and again the on change gets re-rendered, on change gets called, and then B gets added. The value for name gets set as AB, and then this line gets printed, and then the input value will show the value that's a current state, so which is AB now. So like this, that every time we do something, it responds to what we do and then updates the state, and then that updates that re-renders the component, which is if you look at this, it looks so fluid, but then so many things are happening behind the screens to give us the output. This is how it works, and on change is just one of the things. There are so many other things that you can listen for and then respond to. You can bind an event to a certain key, and let's say if someone the user enters N, then you can call a function and then check if the key is N, and then see respond in a different way to that. So basically this is like a fun playground for you to do whatever you want to do, and React offers like a versatile range of things that you can do with event listeners and things like that. Now let's go ahead and make the entire form controlled, which means we are using the state to render its output. And we have to specify in the functions for these. And this for subject, and okay, so let's define other functions. Okay, so our entire form is controlled. We're able to render the output via the state. So now if we say you can look at the console. It's basically like updating every time the state changes, and it's reflecting the changes on the screen. This is great. Okay, so now we fill the form, and if you click on submit, nothing happens. We have to do something for the button as well. We have to make the button controlled. So to do that, we say on click. Just like how we have on change for the input, we have something called on click for buttons, which will listen for the click event and then respond to it with a custom. We can pass in a custom function to listen for that and then respond in a certain way. Okay, so let's define this function on submit. Let's see if this is working. Bind of undefined. Okay. Yeah. So I clicked the submit button and it says form submitted, which is what we have defined in the on submit function. Let's do something else as well. Let's once we submit the form, we want this to be cleared out. So let's do that. Let's set all of these values to be empty strings, and then let's enter the data and click submit. Now it says form submitted, and then it's updated the fields to be nothing. So this is cool. This is how things get done in React. You basically handle the state, and then that updates the UI. Okay, cool. Now when we submit the form, usually what we do is we'd send the form data to an API. I'm not going to show that stuff right now because we don't have an API service that will handle that form data. It's a bit much at the moment, but let's simulate that. Let's make it look like that's what's happening for the user. So when they click on submit, we do all of this, and then we also say form submitted true. So we have something called form submitted, which will be false by default, and then when they submit the form, we're setting that to true. Okay, and whenever the form submission is true, then we want to show something over here that will sort of show the user that the form has been submitted successfully. The way you do that is, the way I'm going to do that is using a ternary operator, which I'll talk about in a bit. So what this is, it's kind of like an if-else statement within the render method. So we are just looking what the value is of this is. A ternary operator is basically you specify a condition over here, and then if it's true, you fire this. If it's false, you fire whatever's after the colon. Now, if the form submitted is false, we don't want anything to happen. But if it is true, we want to show a message to the user saying form is submitted. Okay, so let's run that. Let's see if it works as expected. Okay, so when we click on this, we sort of get a message on the top, says form submitted, and we can make this look a little more natural by specifying the style for this. Now, as I mentioned, if you're going to specify CSS attributes that have hyphen, we replace that with camel case. Now, let's say it's a green colored background, and we have position to be static. Oh, we have to close the style tag. Okay, so we have stuff entered here, and then we say submit. It's a horrible CSS. Let's say color is white, the text, and we can add some padding to it. Say 10 pixels, and margin some maybe set all that up. So let's see. Okay, that looks a little bit better. Let's also add a border radius. To give it a round edge to that, and let's change this to light green maybe. Okay, there's no such thing as light green, I guess. It's something like that. Okay, this looks a little bit better, but we do want the position to be position is I'm just experimenting with CSS right now. Anyway, so we have the contact component ready. Let's say oh, and by the way, what we can do is also this dot set time. Actually, I'm just going to look up the syntax for this one thing. So basically, this is how you look up stuff when you don't know the syntax. Never mind. Oh, okay. So we can just do that, and so set timeout is it's a function that you get by default, I guess. So we'll just wait for maybe 2000 milliseconds and then fire a set timeout event. Okay, that that didn't work out quite as expected. Let's do this exactly like they did. Great, perfect, awesome. So let's do one more thing. I don't like it moving around when the flash message shows up. So we'll do this. You know what, never mind. It's a little bit too much of work for what we're trying to do here. Okay, so this gives us what we want. The form is submitted and we have a notification showing us, and then it disappears back to the same state. Okay, so there we have it. We have a working React application. It's a very simple one: home page, about page, and then a contact page, and then it accepts user input, updates the state, and then on submit it can do what you program it to do. On a real application, you would have something like a fetch, like something that sends a post request with the data to an API service that then handles it at the backend. But right now our application has no backend, so this is the most we're going to get from our demo application. This is great. I'm glad I was able to do this. I hope you can use this. From here onwards, there are a bunch of things you can do. So I would recommend you follow through with the tutorial that they have in the official documentation. This is basically to get you started with getting more exposure to React and how to develop applications with it. The demo that I showed uses state, but then there are a lot of other things that come as part of React applications that I didn't know, that didn't even mention for you. So there are things like props. When components are, when there are multiple components, you can pass properties from one component to another, which is called props. There's it's like a counterpart to state. State is something that you mostly keep within the component, and props are something that you can pass around between components. And every time the state changes, the re-render the component gets re-rendered, and similar to it's what happens when props change as well. So when props change, your component gets re-rendered as well. There are a lot of other things like lifecycle methods. You can listen for changes that are happening within the lifecycle of the component. So a component can get mounted. It can props in the component can change. and the props can get updated. So many things can happen within a component, and there's a list of lifecycle methods that you can use in your component. You can just specify what happens in each lifecycle method. For example, there's stuff like this: component did mount. So when right after the component mounts, whatever you specify in here will be run, and component will unmount is basically where right before the component unmounts, then you can write something in here that'll get run when that happens. And there are other things like component will receive props. So whenever the component receives new props, something else gets fired. So many things. And then there are also event handling, like we just did. On click is an event. It listens for the on click prop, and then does fires a function based on that. If you can get a whole list of all the events that we can use. I think there should be a link to somewhere here. So synthetic event, this is what we're talking about. So over here you can see a list of events: clipboard events, focus events. Let's look at mouse events. Is on click, on context menu, on double click, on drag end, on drag enter, on drag exit. So a lot of all these things that you can do with the mouse are things you can specify as triggers for your functions. So whenever someone does a mouse up, then you can fire something, and then on click, on double click, all these things, you're able to basically capture all the events that a user is capable of doing on your website, and then respond to that in some way. As you can see, this will offer a whole lot of freedom for you as to what to do with your application. This is why React is so powerful. It's so lightweight. It lets you handle things with such specificity, and it's kind of an elegant way of writing code. It's overall is beautiful, and I really love this. Okay, so this concludes the video. I was hoping to keep this really short, but I've had to say some things. So I hope this is useful as a sort of like a springboard for you to start getting deeper into React. If you like this video, just leave me a comment, give me some feedback so that I can improve on things that can be improved upon. If you have some other things that you'd like to get a tutorial on, just leave me a comment on that as well. Thank you. Bye.